Welcome to Off the Wall. My name is Trey. Thank you for joining me today. We've got a lot of information we're going to run through. IFL Week 4 just ended this past weekend. We'll do a recap of some of those games. The AFL training camps are opening up, so we'll touch on some of the teams that will be competing in the AFL in 2024. And then the scientists in the lab at offthewallfb.com, cheap plug, have been tinkering with a new tiering system called Good, Bad that we'll dive into as well. But before we get into it, we are on Twitter. We are on Twitter/X, whatever you may call it, Instagram and TikTok. So please give us a follow on there. Off the Wall FB, F as in foot, B as in ball. Off the Wall FB on each of those platforms. Give us a follow. We're creating different types of content on each. Twitter will be doing a lot of Twitter things, live tweeting during games and as news breaks for different leagues. Instagram will be doing a lot of reels and visual content, as well as TikTok. So please give us a follow on each of those. I would greatly appreciate it. So IFL Week 4, let's dive right into it. The first game we're going to run through today is the Northern Arizona Wranglers at the San Antonio Gunslingers. And Northern Arizona walked away with a victory here, 57-50 over the Gunslingers in San Antonio. And this game was not nearly as close as that score may indicate. Late in the second half, Northern Arizona had a 4-possession lead, and they even pulled their quarterback because the game was pretty much in hand. San Antonio made a late push. They got it to within 1 possession with 0 seconds left on the clock as time expires, so don't let the scoreboard fool you. Northern Arizona, they might be a wagon. And what do I mean by that? So a wagon is a hockey term that refers to a team that's hot, has a really good roster, and is just laying it on teams week after week. And that's what the Wranglers have been the past couple of weeks. They started off week 1 a little rough. I think they'll admit that. But ever since then, their offense, especially their quarterback, Joshua Jones, has been absolutely lights out. He's completing 75% of his passes for 364 yards and 8 passing touchdowns. And keep in mind, 50-yard field, so 364. Double that for what an outdoor production would be. That's a lot of yards. And then he wasn't just doing it through the air, too. He's doing it on the ground as well. He has 3 rushing touchdowns. And so that's 11 total touchdowns over the past 2 games. And like I said, he was pulled early against San Antonio because they had that game in hand. So those numbers could be even higher if he had played the entire game and they really wanted to lay it on. The Wranglers just have such a well-balanced offense, and they evenly distribute the ball amongst all their playmakers. Sometimes you'll see teams kind of lean on one or 2 people a lot and just feed them the ball, sometimes force feeding them the ball. They spread it out amongst all their receivers, McCorker, Maldonado, Elder, and Manyweather. They evenly distribute it. Over the past couple of games, nobody has more than 6 catches. Nobody has less than 3 or 4. So any given play, the defense has to account for every single person on the field, and that can be problematic. And it shows that the Wranglers have the ability to wear teams out and stretch them thin because you don't know where the ball is going on any given play. On the opposite side, San Antonio, their defense is a problem. In their week 1 game against the San Diego Strike Force, they gave up 63 points to the San Diego offense, 9 passing touchdowns through the air. This game, they gave up 57. And again, the Wranglers took their foot off the gas and basically ran the ball for the entire 4th quarter with their backup quarterback in the game. So this could have gotten very bad very quickly if they kept their foot on the gas. And that's something that the Gunslingers are going to have to fix if they want to compete in the IFL. It's interesting to see their transition from the NAL last season to the IFL this season because their offense is spectacular. Offensively, they can score points. That's not an issue. Defensively, they can't stop a nosebleed. Like, they have to get this sorted out because if they don't, it's going to be a very, very long season. They're going to score lots of points, but they're going to give up a lot more if the first 2 games are any indication of how the season is going to go. The next game we're going to get into is the Bay Area Panthers at the Jacksonville Sharks. Bay Area walked away with a 48-24 win in Jacksonville, traveling across the country. Jacksonville was making their home debut. On paper, this game was a NAL champions from last year, Jacksonville, versus the IFL champions from last year, Bay Area. So it was a champions versus champions type of build event. But this could not be farther from that. Starting with Jacksonville, the Sharks are in trouble. That's just the reality of it. That's just the way it is. Their defense is doing good enough to keep them in games for as long as they can, but their offense is not good. That's just the reality of it. They have a very bad O-line. No quarterback on the roster seems to be the answer for this team, which is surprising because they didn't have a lot of turnover on offense from the team that won the championship last year. Sam Castronova, he plays for San Antonio now. He stepped in for Connor Blount, who is the Jacksonville Sharks quarterback, after Blount got hurt last year. So it kind of makes you think, Jacksonville let Castronova walk. Did they make the right decision? And through 3 games for the Sharks, the answer is looking like no. The defense, like I said, is doing a decent job, but they can only do so much against a team like Bay Area, who is so efficient and so proficient on offense. And then kind of talking about the NAL to IFL transition here. So what we just talked about with San Antonio. San Antonio, the offense is great. The defense is bad. With Jacksonville, it's the opposite. The defense is pretty good and putting them in spots where they're contending and covering the spread in a couple of their games. But the offense just can't get anything going. And it's just puzzling to see that this team from last year, which was a league champion, just can't seem to put it together. So the transition from the NAL rules to the IFL rules is proving to be very, very difficult for this Jacksonville offense. They're doing some innovative things in terms of formations and alignments that could hypothetically work, but they can't get out of their own way. They have bad false start penalties here and there. They got misalignment formation penalties from here and there. It's just they're just rough around the edges, and they can't seem to get into rhythm no matter what they do through these first 3 games. So it's going to be super interesting to see how they continue to adapt, because I think this was a team that a lot of people expected to be contenders early on in the season, and that's just simply not the case. Luckily, they're in the Eastern Conference, which is the weaker of the 2 conferences, so they should be able to walk away with a couple wins versus some teams that are also not so good. But as of now, any team that they face that is decent to good, they're going to have a very, very tough time with. On the opposite side of the ball, Bay Area, they're the class of the IFL. I mean, they won the IFL championship last year. They lost their starting quarterback to the Arizona Rattlers. They lost their starting running back to the CFL. But they just reloaded. They went and grabbed a former league MVP for quarterback, and then they grabbed a running back named Shane Simpson from Quad City, who has stepped in and has just been a monster his first couple games with the team. This game in particular against the Sharks, he had 4 touchdowns combined through the air and on the ground, and they just pummeled the Sharks all game. They only had a couple speed bumps in the first half where Jacksonville got a strip sack on quarterback Daquan Neal, but other than that, Bay Area was rolling Jacksonville the entire time and just pummeling them. And they too took out their quarterback and put in the backup in the 4th quarter. So this could have been a lot worse than a 24-point victory and doubling up Jacksonville. So Jacksonville's in a lot of trouble. Bay Area continues to prove why they're the class of the league, and both teams are trending in opposite directions. So hopefully Jacksonville can figure something out, but Bay Area is going to be a very, very tough team to beat. Next up, we've got the Green Bay Blizzard at the Quad City Steamwheelers, and the Green Bay Blizzard walked away with a 32-24 victory, a very low-scoring game in IFL terms. And some of my takeaways from this game are that Green Bay is a very boring team to watch, but that's their brand of football, and that's how they play. They have a very defensive-minded coach. They're in Big Ten country, so it makes sense that they're down with the 3 yards in a cloud of dust mentality, and their fans seem to love it. But they're one of those teams where if you are a Green Bay fan, you will have loved the way this game unfolded. If you are a fan of if you're like a non-Green Bay fan, a neutral fan, just watching IFL because you love the IFL, they're probably one of the most boring teams to watch, no matter who's at quarterback. That's just a reality. That's my perspective. That's how I see it. The Green Bay defense was suffocating all game. Their defensive line, Sean Mustin and Rafiq Abdul Wahid, were unbelievable. They were just terrorizing the Quad City offensive line all game. I just posted a reel on the Instagram page, cheap plug, Off the Wall FB. Go check out that reel. Kind of shows some visuals of that domination that they had all throughout the game. But Green Bay, they just beat up Quad City, and they did it through the ground on offense, and then just suffocating defense. I think the total number of rushing plays that they had outnumbered their passing plays 25-9. They had a backup quarterback starting the game. Not sure why Max Mailer didn't start. Would have loved a heads up on that, Green Bay. But they're just a team where, again, if you're a fan, you love the way they play. If you're not, you don't. So on the opposite side, Quad City, they have to get out of their own way. They had lots of drops all throughout the game, and that really stopped their momentum or prevented it from ever really getting started until late in the game. And by that time, the Green Bay defense just had a chokehold on the offense, and Quad City really couldn't do much. I think what Quad City needs to do going forward is focus on running the ball a lot earlier in the game and a lot more often. Eddie Vander is a very talented running back that they need to feed the ball. And truthfully, quarterback Judd Erickson isn't a threat to run the ball, and they need that to make this offense work. Their quarterback over the last couple of seasons, E.J. Hilliard, is no longer with the team. He was a dual threat. He had 49 passing touchdowns last year and 24 rushing touchdowns in the same year. So Judd Erickson is just not that dual threat guy. And so if you're not going to have that dual threat at quarterback, that running threat has to come from somewhere. So I think they need to feed Eddie Vander the ball a lot more often in order to balance out the offense and give Erickson some time to throw the ball, air it out, get it deep, do all these things that they need to do to be successful, just because this game was a tough watch for a Quad City fan. Next game we got is the Iowa Barnstormers at the Tulsa Oilers, and Tulsa walked away with a win here, 39-31. Some takeaways from this game. Iowa's offense is bad. That seems to be an evergreen statement in college football and indoor football. We'll see if it's an evergreen statement in the AFL as well with the Iowa team there, but their offense is just bad. They scored 3 points in the first half, which is a low-scoring first half in any type of football, let alone the indoor football league. And honestly, the special teams is even worse. Defensively, they are decent, similar to Jacksonville in terms that they're keeping them in games that they have no business being in. And it's not really fair to the defense what they're getting from their offense in terms of support. The offense, I'm trying to figure out the best way to explain this. So growing up, if you played schoolyard football after school with your friends, wherever it may be, you typically put the ball in the hands of your friend that was the best athlete, and he ran around, drew plays in the dirt, made things happen. Now imagine that best athlete that is always quarterback. Imagine he's coming off of a knee injury that made him miss almost all of the 2023 season. That's what Iowa's going through right now, and the offense just does not look good. They look dysfunctional. They look disjointed. They look like they're making stuff up as it goes. The only production that they really get on the offensive side of the ball is when the quarterback is scrambling and trying to make something out of nothing. And when that's the offense, that's a problem. Like, that should be supplemental to what your offensive identity is. When the identity is quarterback running around and figuring things out on the go, that's a recipe for disaster. And that's where Iowa's at. So to Iowa's credit, they did have a touchdown on the first play of the game that got called back for taunting. But still, even if that touchdown stayed, you would have only had 10 points in the first half, which isn't that good either. So Iowa's offense is really holding them back, and they have to get something figured out sooner than later because they are in trouble. But just like Jacksonville earlier, they're in the Eastern Conference, so they have a weaker schedule. They don't have to play the gauntlet that is the Western Conference. So lucky for Iowa, they get to play Jacksonville. Lucky for Jacksonville, they get to play Iowa. So they should get one of them will get a win when they play each other then. But yeah, Iowa and Jacksonville both have work to do, but Iowa has been around for a lot longer within the IFL, so it's a little more disappointing to see their dysfunction in play. But it's still early in the season. It's only week 4 heading into week 5, so we'll see what happens. And on Tulsa's side, you have to give Tulsa credit for the amazing atmosphere and culture that they've created in Tulsa. They had their inaugural season last year, and it did not go well. They only won a couple of games, but they were amongst the league leaders in attendance, which is crazy to think about. One of the worst teams in the league had one of the highest fan base turnouts, and that's due to the culture and game time atmosphere that they've created. That the Box Center, I think it's called the Box Center. Let me look that up. Yeah, the Box Center, it was rocking when they had the missed field goal return for a touchdown and a kickoff return for a touchdown. The place was electric. And usually on some IFL broadcasts, you might accidentally hear one or two people in the crowd yelling in the distance, but you heard a roar of a crowd at this Tulsa game from the Tulsa faithful. So you got to do a little tip of the cap to Tulsa for what they've created there and what they're continuing to build. Offense is still a work in progress. They have the pieces in place. It's just a matter of them figuring it out and putting all the pieces together and using what has worked so far and what worked towards the end of 2023 and continuing to build on that going forward. Much like Iowa, the defense is really leading the way for Tulsa. So we'll have to see how much longer the Tulsa defense can hold on and keep them in games and kind of buy the offense some time to get things set up and get things developed. Because if this offense can really get things clicking and the defense can play even remotely closely to what they've been doing through their first 2 games, Tulsa's going to be a very good team down the stretch. Lastly, we've got the Tucson Sugar Skulls taking on the Duke City Gladiators, and the Sugar Skulls walked away with a 56-49 victory against the Gladiators in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Some notes from that game. Malik Mitchell is the quarterback for Tucson. He is a dark horse candidate for MVP of the IFL. He had 7 touchdowns in this game, 3 through the air, 4 on the ground. He's incredibly athletic. He makes people miss. It's only his 2nd game as a starting quarterback in the Indoor Football League, and he looks like a veteran out there. He's calm, cool, collected. One of the notes of feedback that I had from the first game that they played against Northern Arizona was that he didn't appear to be much of a threat in terms of passing it through the air. He was very much more comfortable running it, tucking it, scrambling, running read options, which is important for the IFL, but you need that aerial threat in order to beat some of the best teams in the league that you'll face on a weekly basis. And he proved that. Opening play for Tucson, he tossed a dime to the corner of the end zone where his receiver, Chris Jackson, just went up and got it. And he finished the game 15 of 18 passing. Again, 3 passing touchdowns. He added 4 more on the ground. He's just turning into a very good player very quickly, which shouldn't be a surprise with the coach that they have in Tucson, Billy Back, who was the coach for Frisco the past couple of years. So the Sugar Skulls offense is kind of gaining its identity and coming to form. And the combination of Malik Mitchell at quarterback and Mike Jones at running back, that's a terrifying thought for a lot of IFL teams that are going to have to face the Sugar Skulls, because if they get within the 10-yard line, if they get within the red zone, what are you going to cover? What are you going to do? Mike Jones is one of the most powerful, explosive runners in the IFL. If they hand the ball off to him, he can easily get it. If they get Malik Mitchell on a play action or a read option going the opposite direction, they're going to force teams to commit one way or the other, and it's basically going to be a coin flip on if they choose right. So Tucson, they looked very, very good on offense. Defense left a little to be desired. They made some boneheaded plays here and there that kept Duke City in the game. But I really liked what Tucson was doing on offense, and Malik Mitchell is a fun quarterback to watch. He is going to be so good within this league, and if he's this good in game 2, I can only imagine where he'll be in terms of progress and improvement by week 8, week 9, week 10, week 16. By the end of the season, he could be a perennial MVP candidate. So we'll see what happens, but super impressed with Tucson in this game. Now with Duke City, oh man, Duke City, they need to get out of their own way. That's the reality of it. Duke City, this is not an official metric, but they lead the league in self-inflicted wounds. That's the way it is. They have lots of dumb penalties. Their quarterback throws lots of interceptions. Through 3 games, he has 7 interceptions, which is entirely too many. He throws a ton of passing yards and a ton of touchdowns, but that's usually because he's throwing interceptions and because they're in a hole where they have to fight back. So if Duke City can somehow get out of their own way, they're going to be a very good team in this league. Right now, they're 0-3, but if they get out of their own way 50% of the time and make 50% less mistakes, they could easily be 3-0, and we're talking about Duke City in a very different light here. And Duke City had some success running the ball early with Jeff Carr, but they just fell into a rhythm of pass because they fell behind early and were trying to catch up. I think what they need to do is focus on running the ball a lot earlier and a lot more often, because the way the running clock rules work in the IFL is that even on incomplete passes outside of the 1 minute mark of each half, the clock continues to run. The clock doesn't stop. So there certainly is an upside to gaining potentially more yards through the air, but you got to have a balanced approach all throughout the game, no matter what the score is. Now, if you're down by 5 scores in the fourth quarter, obviously you might need to pass. But they were never in a situation where the game was totally out of reach. It was within reach for them for the majority of the game if they had a more balanced approach. Their wide receivers are great. Journey Sloan, Greg Dent, they have playmakers all over the field on both sides of the ball. And it's just, as a neutral party, it's frustrating to watch them play because they have all the ingredients to make a great meal, but the meal never comes together. It's so bizarre that when you look at the roster, they have such talent all across the field, but they're sitting at 0-3 because they can't seem to get out of their own way. So I think they'll eventually start to string together some wins, especially with some of the upside that they've shown on offense, and with Ernesto Lacayo at kicker. Deuces and drop kicks are always in play, and they can catch up very quickly. But again, they just need to figure out how to get out of their own way, and they'll be fine. Looking ahead at week 5, we've got a couple interesting matchups, and a couple matchups that are going to be very, very lopsided. First up on Friday night, we've got the Iowa Barnstormers at the Massachusetts Pirates. Massachusetts is 3-0 on the year and has looked very good so far. Iowa is going to have their hands full going into Massachusetts there, so I would not be surprised to see the spread on that game probably be around minus 13.5, minus 14 in favor of Massachusetts. They should roll. They should roll there if they play their game, so we'll see what happens. But later on Friday night as well, we've got the San Antonio Gunslingers at the Vegas Nighthawks. San Antonio, as we touched on earlier, can score lots of points on offense, but defensively, they're going to have their hands full with quarterback Jerome Johnson of the Vegas Nighthawks, who was electric in his week 2 debut with the Nighthawks, scoring 6 total touchdowns and looking great the entire time. He did have an injury in their second game, so we'll see what his status is heading into the week. But San Antonio Vegas is probably going to be a shootout. Going to be a high-scoring game, over/under probably in the high 90s. Vegas probably going to have the edge in terms of the spread, probably in the minus 5.5 range. So no surprise that Vegas will be favored there, but that'll be a very good game, probably one of the better games of the weekend. Quad City on Saturday night goes to Frisco. Quad City has their own things that they need to work out, as we touched on earlier. Frisco has been very, very good so far. Not quite in their 2023 form just yet, but they are getting better, and their defense looks great. Their rushing attack on offense looks great as well. we'll have to see how things start to open up on the passing game. But I would expect Frisco to also be favored there. Probably -8.5, -9, just because Quad City hasn't shown that they can be a threat just yet. So we'll see what that line ends up being. Next up, we've got Tulsa Oilers going to the Sioux Falls Storm on Sunday afternoon. This will be an interesting one. Over-under is probably going to be super low just because Tulsa plays such great defense. But Sioux Falls offense has looked pretty good in their most recent game against Massachusetts. Defensively, if there's a game that Tulsa can figure things out and get going, this could be the one. So I would expect this over-under to probably be in the mid to high 80s and probably would go above that. But I would expect Sioux Falls to be the favorite here by -3, -3.5. Sunday afternoon as well, we've got the San Diego Strike Force at the Arizona Rattlers. This is going to be a very, very good game, very fun game. San Diego can put up all the points in the world. Their passing attack erupted last week with Nate Davis throwing a league record 9 touchdown passes. And so going into Arizona is always going to be a tough out, no matter who comes in, no matter who plays. So we'll have to see if quarterback Dalton Snead is healthy enough to come back and play. If Lorenzo Brown Jr. gets to start, I wouldn't be surprised if San Diego comes into Arizona as the favorite, -3.5, -2.5, somewhere around that range, with an over-under probably in the high 90s as well. So this is going to be a very entertaining game. And then last game on the slate here is going to be the Bay Area Panthers, the defending IFL champions from last year, going to Tucson to take on the Sugar Skulls. This will be a very entertaining game as well. So we've got 3 highly entertaining games on the slate for this week. Bay Area, there's no way that they cannot be the favorites in this game, even if they're coming in on the road. I would anticipate this over-under probably being in the high 90s as well, with Bay Area probably being a 4.5 to 5 point favorite. So we'll see how all those lines shake out. But should be a very, very entertaining weekend of football, especially on Sunday. So if you're going to tune into youtube.com/indoor football. I don't know if it's /indoor football. Search Indoor Football League on YouTube. You'll find the channel. You'll find all the live streams, as well as I believe they're streaming it on caffeine.tv as well. So it's going to be a very entertaining slate of games ahead, and you can follow along the action. I'll be live tweeting some of the games that are occurring and giving my thoughts on some things that are happening in the moment. So come say hi on Twitter, come say hi on Instagram, TikTok, all that stuff. Again, at Off the Wall FB on each of those. Next up, as alluded to earlier, we're going to talk about the tiered ranking system that the scientists over at offthewallfb.com have been developing, called the good, good, bad, bad. Now, every team in the IFL falls on a spectrum. One end of the spectrum is good, good. The other end of the spectrum is bad, bad. So they can fall anywhere in between. Now, there's 4 primary tiers that we're going to work with today. There's the good, good. There's the bad, good. There's the good, bad. And the bad, bad. Not good. So as you can probably put together based on some of the conversations we've already had about last weekend's games, you can figure out where some of these teams are going to fall. But to give you an idea of what each of those tiers means in terms of the teams that'll make it up. A good, good team is a good team that is enjoyable to watch, and they are championship contenders because they've shown that they're good. They are good teams. You watch them play, you're like, dang, that's a good team. Bad good teams are pretty good teams that have flashes of good, good, but they also have a lot of flaws that are holding them back from achieving that next tier. Good bad, which is the third one, is a dysfunctional team that has flashes of good, but can't seem to get out of their own way. And so they have a little bit of work to do to get to that next tier, but they show some potential here and there, and they have their moments of greatness. Then last, we have the bad, bad. And these are teams that are just a tough watch. And typically when you watch these teams play, you'll verbally ask yourself out loud, what are they doing at least a couple times a game? So there's multiple teams that fall into each of these tiers. So we'll go through each of these, starting with the good, working our way down. So we have 5 teams in the good category. First one's going to be the Bay Area Panthers, the defending IFL champions. Second one's going to be the Massachusetts Pirates. Third one's going to be the San Diego Strike Force. The fourth one's going to be the Frisco Fighters. And the fifth one's going to be the Northern Arizona Wranglers. So the Bay Area Panthers, they've reloaded. A lot of teams rebuild from year to year, not Bay Area. They reloaded. They have a new quarterback, new running back, and it looks like they haven't missed a beat. A lot of teams had a rough season debut on offense. They did not. They came in. They looked like they were in midseason form already, which is a scary thought for the rest of the league, because if you're going to catch some of these good teams, you're likely going to catch them early in the season while they have some hiccups, while they figure things out. The fact that Bay Area came in looking in midseason form from the jump is a little problematic for the rest of the IFL and the rest of the Western Conference. So they look very, very good. And the Run It Back tour of 2024 looks like it's gaining momentum and gaining steam. So it's going to take one hell of a performance from an IFL team in order to knock them off. Secondly, we've got the Massachusetts Pirates. They've looked pretty good as well. Similar to Bay Area, they're undefeated. But Massachusetts hasn't looked perfect on offense. They haven't played their best game yet, and they're 3-0. Similar to Bay Area, if you're the rest of the IFL, you got to catch these teams early while they have some hiccups, while they're figuring things out. The fact that Massachusetts had a couple of close games against Green Bay and Jacksonville, but they were able to get away with a win, those are the games that typically teams like Massachusetts or Bay Area would drop early on and then go on a tear. So the fact that they were able to find ways to win those games, and their offense has been improving each game after that, they're going to be a scary team. And Massachusetts, they're in the Eastern Conference, and the Eastern Conference is pretty weak. They play Iowa. They play the combination of Iowa, Sioux Falls, Quad City, and Jacksonville, making up the majority of their schedule. It's not that bad. So it's not unrealistic to see them potentially go 13-3, 14-2, and be the number 1 seed in the playoffs, just due to the scheduling and due to how they've looked so far. Third team, San Diego Strike Force. They are so much fun to watch. Nate Davis, like I touched on earlier, threw 9 touchdown passes last week. And again, they were another one where if you're going to catch them, you're going to catch them early. And they were in a low scoring slugfest with Duke City in their opening game, but they escaped with a win. So good teams find ways to win, and that was a perfect example of that. San Diego looked great on offense last week, or the week before, against San Antonio. Defense leaves a little to be desired, so we'll see how things shake out. They're probably borderline bad good if things go a little bit wonky over these past couple of weeks, but as long as Nate Davis is at quarterback, they're going to be a good team, and they're going to be so much fun to watch. Next on the list, we've got the Frisco Fighters. The league MVP from last season, TJ Edwards, is starting to get some momentum and starting to get comfortable in the offense here. They have a new coach in place. Billy Back, the coach from last year, is now in Tucson. So they had a new coach and a little bit of a roster shakeup with some of their players going to the CFL. But they're starting to get comfortable. And I would like to see them pass the ball a little bit more effectively and a little bit more efficiently. But part of the reason why they haven't been passing the ball is because they haven't needed to. They were in control against Duke City, purely running the ball. TJ Edwards on the ground with the read option is just dangerous for defenses to have to deal with. Frisco's opening game against Tulsa, they had to come back from an early hole that they dug themselves into. So I think Frisco's also kind of bordering on the good to bad good range, depending on how these next couple of weeks shake out. But just based on the body of work that they've submitted so far, and based on how they looked last season with a lot of the same core pieces in place, they're a good team that's fun to watch. And again, them being in the Eastern Conference, aside from Massachusetts, there's not really a ton of teams in the East that should give them much of a fright. So they should be able to get their way into the playoffs without issue. It's just a matter of what seed they get. And then lastly, we've got the Northern Arizona Wranglers, who, as I touched on earlier, they're becoming a wagon before our eyes. They have one of the youngest rosters in the entire IFL, but Coach Les Moss has really shaped them up and really put them in a spot where each of their skill position players is extremely talented and is a threat to score on any given play. So week one was extremely shaky on offense, but they've looked unstoppable over the past couple of weeks. So some of the games that they'll be in will be shootouts. They're going to be a ton of fun to watch. But we'll see how the Northern Arizona offense grows from here and see if they can keep up this momentum, because that's another thing to consider. Are they peaking too early? I don't think so. Just based on what I've seen from them, I think they can keep up this momentum that they've got going. Defensively, they got some work to do to give themselves more situations like they had last week, where they had 3-4 possession lead in the second half. But Northern Arizona is a very, very good team, and they're not going anywhere. Now, moving on to the bad good teams. This is a list of 4 that I have in the bad good teams. The bad good teams are going to be the Green Bay Blizzard, the Tucson Sugar Skulls, the Arizona Rattlers, and the Vegas Nighthawks. So the Green Bay Blizzard, I let my feelings be known about this a little bit earlier. They're a boring team to watch, but the way they play football works. They are very close to being 3-0, and they sit at 2-1 right now. All their games are going to be low scoring slugfests where they're going to beat up on the other offense with their defense, and then they're just going to pound the ball on the ground on offense. And it works for them. And I think it works in their favor. Again, they're in the Eastern Conference, which is the weaker of the 2 conferences. So if they were in the West, I think they'd be in a little bit of trouble looking ahead, but they should be able to get into the playoffs. It just depends on what seed they'll get, whether it's in the 3 or 4 range. Who knows? But I think they're a bad good team just because they haven't shown a propensity to be able to get into a shootout just yet and really be able to weather the storm when a team like Bay Area or a team like San Diego may come to town, or they have to eventually face them. Will they be able to keep up if a team comes in and boat races them from the beginning? Based on what we've seen so far, I don't know if they can. But they should be okay the rest of the way, but they just have a little bit of work to do before they can be considered a good team. Next up, the Tucson Sugar Skulls. So I really, really like Tucson as a team moving forward. I don't think you can classify them as a good team just yet. Offensively, they're able to put up a ton of points, and like I touched on earlier, their quarterback Malik Mitchell is going to be a very, very good player in this league and is already a very, very good player. But their defense is going to have to find ways to make some stops and to cut out some of the boneheaded penalties that they've had over the first couple of games that put some of the opposing offenses in better positions. So I'd like to see Tucson take control of a game early and control it from the beginning to the end before I can see them making that leap up to the good status. Next up, we've got the Arizona Rattlers. Arizona historically is a good team, but so far this year, I have them as a bad good team. And the reason why that is because they're in a similar situation to where they were last year, where quarterback Drew Powell got hurt early, and they had a little bit of a quarterback carousel trying to plug someone in, trying to figure out what works. And Dalton Sneed was their starting quarterback in week 1. He got hurt early. Their first backup didn't work out so well. Lorenzo Brown Jr. got signed off the couch, came into the game a couple days later, and was able to hop in and be an impactful player for that offense. But I think this team needs Dalton Sneed at quarterback because he is a very impactful game manager. Now, I know Cam Newton had a whole thing about game manager versus game changer. Game manager is not a bad thing. Dalton Sneed is a great game manager. He minimizes mistakes and he finds ways to get the best players on his team the ball in open space, whether that be handing off to the running back, finding a receiver on a quick little out, receiver deep, him tucking it on a read option. He doesn't make mistakes, and he finds ways for his offense to be the most efficient and most impactful that it can be, which is what you need in a quarterback and is what Arizona needs going forward. That's the reason why they signed him. So I think when Dalton Snead gets back into the fold, they can jump back up to being a good team the rest of the year. But until that happens, I think they're kind of in this bad-good range. This next team is probably the team I had the most trouble with in terms of these tiers, in that Vegas is undefeated. They're 2-0. So if they're 2-0, how are they bad-good? The reason why I have them as bad-good is because they won their first game on a last-second field goal, and they won their second game after holding on, and the Jacksonville Sharks had a rally to come back and make it a one-possession game late in the fourth quarter. Vegas ended up icing it. They ended up running out the clock. They walked away with a win. But to me, in order to be a good team, you have to really control a game from start to finish and not let things get too wonky towards the end. Vegas put themselves in a really good position in their first game against Arizona. They let Arizona back in. Vegas was in a very good position against Jacksonville. They let Jacksonville back in. Now, in the Jacksonville game, their quarterback, Jerome Johnson, did get hurt. That is true. So that kind of derailed some of the momentum that they had. But still, you got to be able to finish these games out and close it out. So on defense, they have a lot of young players that they're still figuring out how they're going to work, and they're still figuring out the nuances of the game. So their defense is going to be fine in the long run. As long as Jerome Johnson is healthy, they have the ability to make that leap up to good. I switched them between good and bad good a couple different times. On my notes, I have it scratched out 2 or 3 times on each column, just because it was a tough one. But ultimately, I think they are a good team right now with the potential to be a good team moving forward. Now, the third tier of team that we have here is the good-bad. So not to be confused with bad-good, the good-bad teams. In this tier, we have the Quad City Steamwheelers, the Tulsa Oilers, the Sioux Falls Storm, the San Antonio Gunslingers, and the Duke City Gladiators. So starting with Quad City, a theme with all these teams is get out of your own way, and that really applies to Quad City. In their game against Green Bay, they had lots of drops, lots of dumb penalties that really derailed any momentum that they had or that they were starting, and could never really get things fully going. So if Quad City can get the ball in the hands of their playmakers and get out of their own way, they should be able to easily take the next step to the next tier of team and be a contender. And being that they're in the Eastern Conference, again, the weaker of the two conferences, they should be able to have plenty of opportunities to get in the win column and to prove themselves and to figure things out. So I think they'll be fine the rest of the season. They should be able to sneak into the playoffs. But as of right now, based on the first 4 weeks of the season, they're a good-bad team. Next up, we've got the Tulsa Oilers. I think they're a good-bad team as well. Defensively, they play very, very great defense, which makes sense. Their head coach, Marvin Jones, all-time college football linebacker. It makes sense that the defense is leading the way, and the offense really has to figure things out and get things going to complement that. Until that happens, I think they're stuck in this good-bad range where they have their flashes of brilliance and they have their flashes of good. But like this past game, for example, the only touchdowns they scored on offense were punched in from 1 yard away on a QB sneak. I would like to see them make more dynamic plays as a team to get into the end zone so that they're not solely relying on a brotherly shove or a tush push into the end zone to score all their points. That's great. All touchdowns count the same. I don't fault them too much for doing that, but I'd like to see them score from 20, 25 yards out to show that they're a threat to do it from anywhere on the field. Then next up, we got the Sioux Falls Storm. They are also on this list of good, bad teams where their opening game, they could not get out of their own way. And they got out of their own way a little bit better in their second game. But as long as they continue to improve, they should be on their way out of the good-bad range into the bad-good range. I think of these teams, they have the best chance to make the jump to the next tier based on how the next couple of weeks shake out and based on how they performed in their most recent game. But I think quarterback Billy Hall is starting to get a little more comfortable, and he's proven to be more of a dual threat than I would have given him credit for. But Sioux Falls should be okay. They have a great culture there and a great fan base that fills the arena, and they're used to winning, so they should be fine. But we'll see what happens over these next couple of weeks. Next up in the good bad teams, we've got the San Antonio Gunslingers. Offensively, they are explosive. They are a fun team to watch, but defensively, they can't stop anybody, and that's what's holding them back from the next tier. They have to get their defense figured out. They can't be giving up 60 points a game and expect to be a contender. Obviously, great if you can score 50, 55, 60 a game. That's fantastic. But if you're giving up that much, if not more, that's a problem. So defensively, they have a lot of work to do before they can make that leap. But I think it's within their wheelhouse and something that they can do. Side note on San Antonio, we got to do something about the car horns and the truck horns at their home stadium. Apparently, they have a truck group or something that they allow their trucks to come in and park in this arena during the game, and they're just honking and blaring their horns the entire time. What are we doing, San Antonio? We got to figure this out. It made for a very annoying broadcast. Maybe it was just me. If it was just me, I'll shut up. But we got to get that figured out. Lastly, in the good bad teams, we have the Duke City Gladiators. Man, Duke City, please get out of your own way. If they could find a way to get out of their own way and stop making these boneheaded plays, whether that be turnovers, interceptions, bad unsportsmanlike penalties that move the ball halfway down the field. If they could figure out how to cut those out, they could be a very, very good football team. They have talent at all the skill positions that they need to be successful. It's just a matter of making all the ingredients work together. They have the potential to do it. It's just a matter of it all cohesively coming together all at once. Not to do back-to-back side notes, but I do have a side note for Duke City. Duke City, we need you to update your website. We need you to update your roster. It's week 4 of the 2024 season. We go to the Duke City website. We look up the roster. They still have the 2023 roster listed as their official team roster. It's frustrating for me because I'm trying to learn as much about the team as possible, trying to find these players, trying to learn more about the players, trying to learn more about where they came from, their background, where they played college football, where they played professionally elsewhere. But we don't even have an accurate roster of who's on the team currently and who's taking the field. So this seems like something that should be a day one, week one thing that's figured out. Not almost, every other team in the IFL that I've seen has these rosters updated, and it's not an issue. Duke City seems to be the only one that can't seem to get it together and get out of their own way. So I think it was Jerome Johnson tweeted something out earlier this season. How you do anything is how you do everything. So if Duke City is a little sloppy off the field, it shouldn't be a surprise that they're sloppy on the field as well. So it's just little stuff like that. It's like, man, I really want Duke City to be good. I think they can be good, but little stuff like that on and off the field can be improved and could get them from that good-bad range to that bad-good range. Now, if you're doing the math, you're keeping track here, we have 2 teams that we haven't mentioned yet, and they each fall in the bad category. That's the Iowa Barnstormers and the Jacksonville Sharks. So the Iowa Barnstormers, as we've touched on earlier, their offense is not good. when you watch them play, it seems like they get in the huddle, they say, run around and figure it out on 3, ready, break. And they run around and try to figure it out, and that's not good enough. That's not a good enough game plan. Iowa's defense is doing enough to keep them in these games and keeping it close, but their offense has to find a way to be impactful from the jump and not put themselves in a hole where they have to be throwing the ball every single play, because the strength of Darius James Peterson as a quarterback is when he can run the ball and when he can hurt you with the run. But if you're in a position where you're chasing points and you have to be tossing it around, that competitive advantage goes out the window. So you really have to lean into your competitive advantages, and that means getting started early and figuring things out and not putting yourself in a hole. And then secondly, we got the Jacksonville Sharks, just like Iowa, bad offense, pretty good defense that keeps them in games. I appreciate some of the creativity that the Jacksonville offense has presented over time in terms of formations and trying to lean into some of the things that made them successful in the NAL with some power run packages, lining up a defensive lineman at wide receiver, putting him in motion as a blocker, kind of like a fullback. I get the vision. It's just not working. So the O-line has to get better. The quarterback play has to get better in order for them to be competitive in this league. Because, again, the defense is doing their job. The offense just has to help out. For the last section of the episode today, I want to touch on the Arena Football League with training camp opening up for those teams this week and last. I want to kind of start to touch on what's happening with the Arena Football League and where they're at. Not much to really touch on just yet in terms of like individual players on teams, and we have yet to know what the team rosters will look like, but I figured we could run through the list of teams and kind of lay that foundational baseline for the weeks ahead. As more information does come to light, we'll be able to dive into it a little bit further. But starting off, there's going to be 16 teams in the Arena Football League this year, 4 divisions of 4 teams each. We're going to have the Western Division, the Central Division, the South, and the East Division. So starting off in the West, we're going to have the Rapid City Marshals. So Rapid City is in South Dakota. Washington Wolfpack, which is in Washington State, just outside of Seattle and Everett. The Oregon Black Bears, which I believe is going to be in Salem, Oregon, not too far outside of Portland. And then the Billings Outlaws is going to be in Billings, Montana. So 2 of these teams are brand new teams that have never played a down in football before. That's the Washington Wolfpack and the Oregon Black Bears. They are expansion teams that were created this year to start in AFL 3.0. The Rapid City Marshals and the Billings Outlaws, they've bounced around a couple different leagues over the past couple of years, so they have been around for a bit. Billings has a little bit better history of success than Rapid City, but both of those teams are somewhat established within their communities already, so they should have a pretty good transition to the AFL. They're not having to start from scratch like Washington and Oregon. This is going to be a very interesting division. There's obviously a lot of unknowns that we don't know about, but this is truly anyone's division. Like it really depends on who hits the ground running. The AFL season's only going to be 10 games long, so they don't really have a lot of time to work through the kinks and get comfortable, because once you're 2 weeks in, that's 20% of the season. You only have 80% of the season left after that. So they got to figure things out early. And I think for the West Division in particular, they might have a little more flexibility because everyone's going to be figuring things out on the fly as the season progresses. So this will be an interesting division to keep an eye on. In the Central Division, we have the Iowa Rampage, we have the Wichita Regulators, the Salina Liberty, and the Southwest Kansas Storm. So 3 of the Central Division teams are based in the state of Kansas, with the 4th being in Iowa. So Iowa Rampage, brand new expansion team that's being created this year to start in AFL 3.0. The Wichita Regulators, the Salina Liberty, and the Southwest Kansas Storm have all existed in some capacity over the past couple of years in smaller leagues. So this should be a pretty interesting division to watch as well. Salina has had the most success off the field, or I should say outside of the AFL on the field in other leagues. So I would imagine that they have a bit of a leg up when it comes to the kickstarting the season in the Central Division in particular. But lucky for all these teams, they're all pretty close. So travel's not going to be the worst thing in the world. It's not like they're having to log a bunch of flights and sky miles and all that stuff. Probably going to be taking a lot of buses, a couple hour drive here or there. But yeah, travel should be a little bit easier for them. Not having to leave the state of Kansas a ton for teams like Wichita, Salina, and Southwest Kansas. So yeah, a lot to unpack and a lot to unfold as we figure out what the rosters are going to look like moving forward for each of those. But moving on to the South Division, this is where things get a little more interesting in terms of getting teams that have been in the AFL before. So in the South Division, we have the Louisiana Voodoo, we have the Orlando Predators, we have the West Texas Desert Hawks, and then we have the Georgia Force. So the Louisiana Voodoo, in a past life, they were the New Orleans Voodoo. They're not going to be based in New Orleans, at least not this year. They're going to be based in Lake Charles, so that's why they have the name Louisiana instead of New Orleans. The Orlando Predators, they've been around since the early 90s. They're one of the legacy franchises of all of arena football and arguably the most successful franchise that the AFL has within AFL 3.0 launching this year. The West Texas Desert Hawks, they're newer to the arena scene, but they've put together a pretty talented roster based on some of the additions that they've announced on their social media. So they're going to be a very, very interesting team. And then the Georgia Force, there's a lot we don't know. They've had some changes in some of the leadership of the team, both on and off the field. So a lot we don't know, but I would imagine that the Orlando Predators and the West Texas Desert Hawks are probably the front runners in that division. But we'll have to see how things unfold. And then last but not least, we have the East Division. And in the East Division, we have the Minnesota Myth, we have the Nashville Cats, we have the Philadelphia Soul, and then the Albany Firebirds. So the consensus amongst a lot of the arena super fans, I guess we'll call them, us, is that the Albany Firebirds are going to be the class of the AFL. They have the most, even though they are like a revived franchise, they have the most continuity in terms of they've had a past life as the Albany Empire, and their core players and coaching staff has been around each other for extended periods of time. They're very comfortable already. So they already have some built-in chemistry and continuity with each other. So I think they're going to be the team to beat, not just in this division, but throughout the entire league. Philadelphia, changes in leadership on and off the field. Just like Georgia, there's a lot we don't know about them. Nashville, I think, has a sneaky roster that they've put together. They have a lot of folks from the IFL that they've poached, and they have some really talented folks from the outdoor game that they'll be transitioning to the arena game as well. And then Minnesota Myth, they are a team that was created for the AFL 3.0 launch. This will be their expansion year, so they have never played a down of football. So we'll have to see how things shake out with them. And that'll do it for this episode of Off the Wall. I appreciate you spending some of your time with me today. There's only 24 hours in the day, but the fact that you chose to spend some of that time with me means a lot, so I appreciate it. If you're watching us on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe, all that stuff. It'll help with the algorithm, get us into more people's computer screens and eyeballs. And if you're listening to us, please rate, review, all that stuff. It'll help us get into more people's ear holes. So appreciate all of you who have taken the time to listen and watch today. Again, we're on social media on Twitter /X, Instagram, and TikTok. It's going to be at Off the Wall FB, F as in foot, B as in ball, Off the Wall FB. Give us a follow. The offer from last week still stands. If you follow us, shoot me a DM. You'll get a free virtual high five, only redeemable via DM. So give us a follow on there. And until next time, we'll see you next week. Bye.